because we have finished at 10:55. Seriously, at 45, 10:45. Yeah. Yes, that would be the schedule. Okay. Well, this last class would be about prevention of spiritual abuse. I have uploaded to a few PDFs in the Dropbox with 2 articles. One is translated into English because the publisher translated it. The other one is only in the original Spanish, and with both articles is from which I have taken these contents. So if you want to deepen, I will be very short because we have only 45 minutes, but you can deepen on those articles. I have already uploaded another 2 articles from another book, the book on spiritual accompaniment in movement and new communities that can also help. One is about the distinction between internal and external form, and the other one is about a healthy, well, about the same, about prevention of abuse, but from a different author, from Massimo Camisasca, who is an Italian bishop. So let us begin by what is spiritual abuse. The origin of the wording of the expression comes from some Protestant communities in the United States at the end of the 60s. These communities invited people who followed them to share with the pastor and consult with them all the personal decisions, change in their job, the partner, expense, everything, in order to foster their spiritual growth. Tell me everything, I will tell you if it is okay or not, and then you won't fail and you will go faster in your spiritual life. It was even founded on some biblical text, and what happened is that those people, at the end, many of them suffer from serious psychological damage, because it happened that they were like infantilized, like made children. Like they had to work as adolescents even if they were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and so. And so they had a similar pattern of psychological damage as people who have suffered from mobbing, from bullying, or people who have suffered by an abusive husband, and so. So then, the spiritual abuse was used when some people invade other people environment or decisions in the name of God. And that is the key question, because I can invade other people's intimacy in marriage, but the problem is that when it is made in the name of God, God wants you to do this. That is the question. That is the invasion. Obviously, in a topic in which God has not said anything about that. It is not spiritual abuse if I say somebody, don't steal, don't kill, don't use drugs, because it is clear that it is not mine, it is the morality. It would be abusive if I said, God wants you not to visit your parents this weekend. That is the difference. Because how do you know what God wants with this person? How do you know? No, I'm very sure because I have prayed about that, because these are the criteria, because they are the rules, the norms, and so on. But the rules usually do not descend to the concrete case. So that cases then have been generalized and opened to a wider perspective, not only in that small community, Protestant communities, but also the term has been taken even in the Catholic Church. And it exploded because of the crisis of sexual abuses that began in the United States in 2002 with Spotlight and all that stuff, and then we are still suffering some scandals. Because it has been seen, and it was mainly, there was a specific moment, which was the letter of Pope Francis to the church in Chile. Then he said, behind every sexual abuse, there is some abuse of authority, some abuse of conscience, some spiritual abuse. I must say that when I first heard that, I said, the Pope is diluting so much the problem. He has to face a concrete problem, which is sexual abuse, and now he's creating a larger problem that nobody has thought about that. That was my first reaction. And it lasted for a few years until I began working and studying on spiritual abuse and reading the testimonies, the witnesses of the people who suffered abuse, and then you say you see that they were abused because before there was this abuse of power, that spiritual abuse. So, and then if you want to cancel the plague of sexual abuse, you have to enter to the basement and to not to change, but to improve the way you understand spiritual accompaniment. The problem of spiritual abuse mainly has not been found in parishes, but in communities, in charismatic communities, in communities in which there is a personal commitment and an asymmetry. So those are the ingredients. In a parish, there can be, but it is not so frequent. It is more frequent in an institution in which you enter and you look in that community, support, advice, and also a hierarchy. So that's why in most of the cases have occurred in religious or even in lay communities. So when I am speaking about that, I am not referring to a specific institution of the church, because unfortunately there have been so many institutions that have been challenged with problems or even have been denounced. Perhaps something that I am going to say you can recognize in your own institution. I have suffered that, or even I have done that. Don't worry. It means that you have to deepen in the nature of spiritual accompaniment and on the dignity of the person. And it has happened a lot of times during the history of the church in morality. For example, the death penalty was seen as something absolutely normal and legitimate for a lot of centuries. As you know, Pope Francis changed it. Well, first, John Paul II wrote the Catechism of the Catholic Church in 1992, approved. 5 years later, when they reviewed it in the Princeps edition, which was the Leading edition, he changed the point on the death penalty, putting harder conditions so that it is legitimate. Pope Francis, about 2020, changed again. That has been changed by John Paul II, saying that today in our world, death penalty is not legitimate anymore. Why? Because now you have a lot of means in society to protect herself. The death penalty has two motivations: protect society from a person who is very dangerous. Now you have means. Recently, we have here that Alcatraz is going to be reopened. So there are means to protect society from dangerous people. As a jail, yes, it was 2-3 days ago. And then to punish the people so as to restore justice and so as to say other infractors, pay attention that you are going to suffer. But to live in a prison, a security prison for all those years, I think that it can be enough as a punishment and also as an announcement to the people who wants to. So it has changed. Another very clear case is, how do you say usura? The usury. It was absolutely forbidden in the church under penalty of excommunication until 14th century, more or less. If you lend some money, you can only receive that money, not some interest. Otherwise, it is usury. Obviously, all the Western world and all the world nowadays is based on what was called usury, but now, in the same way that the Pope with death penalty depends on the dignity of the human person and society, depending on economy and the rules of economy, you change your concept of morality. So there is a normal evolution as long as you deepen even in human sciences. For example, in this case, in psychology, you see that it is better for the person not to be so invasive trying to help her. So when do these cases happen? Mainly when there is a personal situation of asymmetry, when there is a teacher-disciple relationship, or even when there is an institutional asymmetry. That is, these institutions in which they accept people and they guide people. The problems then come when one does not accept self-determination, does not accept that the person is the first responsible of her decisions, of her formation. When you feel that you have everything under control and so that everything works well and everybody works well, you have to be the filter and you have to approve the decisions. So some examples of this spiritual abuse. The key point can be when the person stands between God and the person affected as a filter, as an oracle that transmits immediately the divine word, and then nothing can be objected. If you challenge me, you are challenging God. There is an expression of John Paul II in Pastore da Bobobis, one of his apostolic exhortations, in which he says that, this is for the priest, but it can be in general for the spiritual companion, he says that he has to be image and transparency of God. Not only that has to represent God in a certain way, obviously every human and spiritual authority in some way represents God, but an image stops the sight. If you are looking at me, you cannot look the picture which is behind me, so I'm stopping the sight. A spiritual companion has to be also transparent, so that looking at me, you see at God, and then I disappear, like Saint John the Baptist. He has to grow, I have to disappear. Image, yes, because you have to really to represent God. All of us are called to be configured with Christ and have to show the people the attraction, the appealing of Jesus Christ. But then you have to say, don't look at me. What you see good in me comes from God. And don't look at my advice. Look at what God is trying to tell you. So the person tries to be consulted about everything, even in fundamental choices that are not ruled by person. And here we can find people who comes to institutions and are really looking for that. People insecure, people with wounds. I remember speaking with a parish priest who had a nice community of high schoolers, and he told me, look what happened to me. One of the girls came to me and she told me, Father, I am thinking on this other member of the group asked me to be fiancés, and what do you think about that? And the priest told me, I was about to tell her my opinion, but I stopped, thanks God, because I said, she's going to follow blindly what I am going to tell her, and it is not a good thing for her. She's insecure, she's dependent. So just I rebounded the answer, and I said, what do you think? I knew, he told me, I knew what was better for her. I knew that this man was not the person better for him, because he was very invasive, because he was too sure of himself, and so he would counsel her. But if I told her in that way, I would not have respected her, and I would not have helped her to take her own decisions. Perhaps I would have avoided that she becomes dependent of that boyfriend, but I have fostered that she becomes dependent of me, instead of knowing to think and to take her the choices and decisions. So another way of spiritual abuse would be to claim the exclusivity over the soul. And this is a very delicate question in institutions, because when you receive a person, you try and do the formation, mainly at the beginning, and you offer spiritual accompaniment, and it is normal that if the person looks for a different spiritual companion, you say, what happens? Does he or she have a bad spirit? Is he or she going to lose her his her vocational identity? Then I agree that if the institution offers, it would be normal that the people follows that advice of their companion, but they must be free, really free, to choose confessor and spiritual director. And if somebody asks you, I am going to open my soul to this or that person, priest, layman, religious woman, or whoever, accept it, and also ask yourself and ask that person, what are you looking there? Are you looking for the guru? Are you looking for an answer or a help that you don't find in our institution? Because you can find that there are very complex problems that need a specific training. And perhaps when this person is going outside the institution, is telling you, I don't find trained person inside the institution. Or the people with which I am speaking do not give me what I need, the answer, the affection, the understanding, and so. If you accept that, not as a critique, but a point of perhaps you can improve. Instead, if you say, I have to, come also with me and also with me, you won't improve. I must also say that I receive spiritual direction from religious men, religious women, like people, married people, and people from different communities. I am not a religious man, a religious woman, a married person, and I am not a member of those communities. And I try to foster that commitment with our vocation, because I try to be a good spiritual director. And so when they come to me and look for my spiritual direction, I think that they are not betraying their community. I also ask them, why are you looking for me? Because we don't have spiritual direction inside our community, and anyone have to look at outside. Okay, but some of them, because I don't find what I need, and perhaps you can give me it. Okay, but then then asking for, we are speaking about more and more deep manifestations of spiritual abuse, when the abused person is asked for blind or unconditional obedience. Don't think, just do what I do. Out of the normal trust that can be asked, but I ask to trust me, not obey me. And then here we arrive to the difference between the sphere of spiritual accompaniment and the sphere, the environment of governance, which are different. It is something that the chart has also pointed very specifically, as you well know, in the last also 15-20 years. One thing is the governance of the institution, another thing is spiritual accompaniment. And it is good to maintain, even if logistically it can be difficult, but it is better to maintain that difficulty, because the chart is trying to privilege the freedom of the person to look for spiritual advice, avoiding institutional consequences. That is the key. The pattern or the model of those things, because it is the thing that has been more studied, is the priesthood formation in seminaries. That is the key example. Then you can translate it into your reality, mutatis mutandis. What Gosdemon showed is that if the superior knows the interior life, if the superior is the spiritual companion, then the seminarian won't tell him some problems, because if I tell him, I won't ever be ordained. So if you confound those environments, you are in some way, unfortunately, but it is real, it shouldn't be the case, but it is like that, you are fostering insincerity, and you are fostering that the people keeps the problem with himself, even when he becomes a priest, when he takes the vows, when she goes ahead with the vocation. Because if I speak freely, it will be known, and they will take consequences, and they will cut me out, they won't give me responsibilities, and so. Then the difference between those environments, governance and spiritual direction, also show that there are two different virtues that are put in action in those environments. In governance, you have to live obedience. Obedience to the rule, obedience to the leader, obedience in those things that are written in the rules, in the statutes, in the book. Every institution has some book of rules, and you have to obey them. And every institution has also the limits of that obedience. I have to obey in these things and other ones. If someone tells me to transfer to another city, in some institutions you have to do that. In other institutions, you are only asked, what about if you go? And then you have to know what are also your rights, speaking about rights in institutions sometimes seems difficult, but it is also so as to defend the dignity of the person that is compatible with a complete give up of oneself in the institution. So obedience. Instead, in spiritual accompaniment, you live docility, which is a different virtue, because docility does not depend, the obedience depends on justice. Justice is giving everyone what he deserves. Instead, docility belongs to another virtue, which is prudence. So as to take a prudent decision, it is supposed that you have to, not for every single decision, but when the decision is strong or is you are in doubt, you are called to ask for advice. And that is what does the spiritual companion. She gives advice, and the person, with her prudence, has to decide if she follows the advice or not. And then me, as spiritual director, or even me, as superior, when I found that these people does not follow advices, I ask, why don't you follow? And perhaps you are imprudent. And if you are imprudent, perhaps you shouldn't follow this vocation. But not because you are not obedient, but you are imprudent. So that is the key. Then when you receive spiritual direction, perhaps you have to change their mind, because the wording is, in some cases, can be overlapped. But the problem is that there has been a confusion of the wording. And it has been called obedience, which should have been called docility. And so the person who receives the spiritual direction automatically thinks that you have to obey me so that I can give orders to you. And obviously that is not spiritual direction. It is a corruption of spiritual direction. And sometimes it can happen without realizing, because there have been an habit that has been transmitted one generation after the other, until that you stop and you say, hey, we are out of the way and we didn't realize. So keep calm, go instead into your way. If necessary, give clear explanation to the people so as to, hey, we have to be attentive to that, and also to be clear and to say, because if you are in the wrong way, not absolutely, but in some specific ways, you have also to be clear. We have to move from an error to the good practice, the best practice. Usually it does not work when you say we are going to do the same while we are changing, because it is a confusing message. And then people get confused and then they don't know what they have to do. Yes?
The last point you're saying, can you expound on that a little bit? My question was about docility. So could you talk a little bit about the relationship between docility and prudence? Because I think I understand in principle what you're saying, but in English, docility still implies obedience, submission, like it's a very submissive attitude. So could you explain a little more the connection?
Well, it is as Aquinas organizes the virtues. And as Aquinas considers that the virtues, so to live prudence, you have to put some ingredients. For example, docility, prudence includes that you have to look at your past, at your experience, at the expertise of other people, and also the docility to know what wise people know, and to have it in mind in order to take the decision along with other elements. So not to follow blindly what you have heard, but to consider it in the context of all the data. Okay?
What about like young vocations, like when it's more like you're like a coach where they're learning, like when you have to learn a sport or whatever, it's not just like you You say, and then they do it like they have to watch and learn, like
when they are young vocations, they have to be specific, especially docile, because they are entering to a reality that they have to they're building their identity. So they probably will be open to change some ideas so as to build an identity more according to their vocation in which they are growing. A young vocation is like an adolescent. We spoke about that in the first class, and so he has to be a little more open to change, and at some point it will arrive the time in which he will arrive to the adolescent crisis, and she will have to say, okay, thanks for so much information, but now I have to make my own identity. That will be in some points similar to what you have told me. In other times it will be more personal, and then you are as a superior has to say, this identity that has been built is compatible with the charisma or not, and that is the question of identity or vocation discernment in the following steps that she has to do. This is the person that I have. It is a good, strong, not definitive, not absolutely, not perfectly constructed, but is it a personality, an identity that is according to the charisma, to the spirit of that institution. Okay, so let's go ahead. So we have spoken about the authority and the abuse of power that is in the basis and is the first abuse that has to be avoided. In a strict sense, the abuse of power is when there is a power of office, someone that has an appointment, a role, or a role of superior in the institution. But do not forget that there is also the moral authority, and that is the authority in which most of the spiritual abuses have been committed, not by the superior, because obviously if the superior tells me still, I'm going to tell him no. One is more open to challenge authority because there is some kind of natural distrust towards authority. But what about moral authority? What about the person who, because of her role, I trust her, because she's a leader, because she plays the guitar so well, because he plays soccer so well, because he has he's known as a saint or wise person, then I trust him. And then comes what a paradox, which is that trust makes you vulnerable because it lowers your sense of criticism. You are always open to protect yourself towards government, but towards the person that you trust, you automatically think that everything that comes from him or her could be true, could be for your well. And then what can we do? If trust makes you vulnerable to suffer abuse, we to base the formation and spiritual for accompaniment, have we to base it on distrust? Obviously not. And I think that the model of a family can work for that. A family that protects the people, a family that respects the people, and a family, remember, in which the people are not treated as children or adolescents when we're speaking about adults, but I can act as the mother of a child that has grown up and now is a mother of family, that is adult, that is mature, that can and must take her own decisions. So what about abuse of conscience? For many people, it is the same, spiritual abuse and abuse of conscience. I would say that there is a kind of difference between spiritual abuse and abuse of conscience, because in spiritual abuse there is do it because God wants you, so it is that kind of order, illegitimate order. In abuse of conscience there is one more step included in the previous one, so it is like the matryoshkas, those Russian dolls that one is inside the other. The big picture would be authority, abuse of authority, both canonical or moral authority. Then you have the spiritual abuse. Do this because God wants you to do that. In abuse of conscience, you manipulate the integrity of the person, her sense of what is good and what is evil. And then you don't say only do it blindly, but I say do it willingly. Do the thing that I am telling you, because otherwise you will be condemned. It would be an example when you say you are sinning against God if you don't follow my instructions. So the moral judgment of the people changed, because now I don't have to obey God, but I have to obey this man that I have in front of me. So there will be bad consequences of not following my advice. As example, you will go to hell, or you will become a bad person, or whoever. A case of abuse of conscience is when somebody tries to impose certain moral decisions in areas in which church leaves to free discernment of the individual. As example, a spiritual director of a married man or woman who are using natural methods of birth control, and this person says, you have to be open to life, you cannot use natural methods of family planning, because you are being egoist, because you don't trust God, and so on. You are going against humane vitae, because who are the responsible of family planning? Who have to take the decision of being of using these natural methods, or to be open in every relationship to have children? Obviously, the married couple, also because they are the ones that will carry the baby for 9 months. In the case of the mother, we will have to grow up the baby, the child, and so on. Another thing that can also be an abuse of conscience is when you tell a person you have vocation. You can, if you are reasonable, what you can say is, I think that you have all the conditions. But to say God is calling you, how can you know it? Because I have seen it in my prayer, but you have a private revelation of what happened. So dealing mainly with young, immature person that trust you and think that whatever you say will be the truth, you have to be very prudent so as to they really take their own decisions. Another abuse of conscience would be to force some people to a full manifestation of her conscience. You can invite the people, but you have also to respect the people. And then again, prudence. if the P person is not prudent and do not open completely her conscience, I can also take my decisions, as example, not recommending her, advising her not to follow the vocation, because there is a lack of trust, But what I cannot do is to force, you have to tell everything. I can invite, but not force. And she has to be really free to open or not her conscience. So an example of abuse would be, don't discern because I have done all the discernment for you. Just follow. The person has to do her own discernment in front of God. At the long term, it is what works. Because sooner or later, the person will have problems in her vocations. And if the vocation is not well founded on a free, personal, and discerned decision, she can say, I didn't take my own decision. I was very influenced, everybody has been influenced to take the decisions, but really, I only followed blindly what told me another person. And then in these 5 minutes, we're going to speak very quickly, but it is a long article that I have also uploaded in Spanish about personality issues. What are the personalities in danger of doing or suffering spiritual abuse? People who are in danger of suffering spiritual abuse, we have already spoken about that, are insecure or dependent personalities. So with those people, we have to be attentive in the way that we speak to them, and also help them to say no, to establish limits, and obviously not to obey or not to be docile when they are asked something that go against their moral consciousness. Yes? The moral conscience. Nobody can force you to act against your moral conscience. And some people who suffered the spiritual conscious abuse and then sexual abuse were manipulated in the sense that do this because it is not bad. In our case, it is not bad. And they say, I thought that something was wrong in that. You act against your conscience. And it can never be done. From the point of view of the spiritual director, spiritual companion, the risk comes from narcissism or antisocial personalities. The person who enjoys commanding, the person who needs somebody to manipulate, to follow them, to admire them, and so. And part of the formation and part of the discernment of idolatry made for institutions that are part of their charisma is to receive spiritual direction, is to be attentive to such people. People who are manipulative, people who have exaggerated sense of their own importance, people who do not accept that other people tell their no, people who tend to invade other people's intimacy, people who ask more than they give. They ask for favors, but they are not available to give back. People who despise rules and justify themselves. People who, when they do something wrong, do not accept and apologize, but try to play with rules, saying that in my case it was different. Well, it was not. Just you did a mistake. So acknowledge your mistake, apologize, and nothing happened. So those persons, you have to check if you live with them mainly in the process of discernment and initial formation. You can be attentive, you can accompany them, you can point in the daily life what they are doing wrong, and then you have to do a decision. This person will respect the other people's freedom, or he or she will be invasive. Because if you don't work on that, you can insert in your institution something which is a real danger. Obviously, some trait is different from a personality disorder, which is the problem. Okay. So finally, there is another personality in danger of being abusive, which is all the opposite of that. You can say that the narcissist or antisocial personality is the easy person to realize. The difficult one is the one who does abuse with goodwill. The person who is very insecure, who wants the good for the other people, but wants to protect her. That is very afraid because she had been given that task of spiritual accompaniment, or superior, of governance, and so, and she's so afraid of the task that she wants to control everything. And then we arrive at the beginning, at those, it was called the heavy shepherding. I want to be your pastor, but I want to control everything, so that you don't make any mistake, because if you do a mistake, if you lose your vocation, if you sin, if you go out the way, I will feel very, very guilty. I will feel failed. The superiors will tell me you are not a good spiritual companion, a good superior. So in order to protect you, you are invading other people's freedom. So it can look that you are looking for the good of the other person. Instead, you are trying to protect yourself. You are trying, instead to struggle with your own insecurity, you are trying to manipulate the other people. Okay, so that's the end. We might speak for longer about this topic, but I think that is more or less enough. And as I said, I have uploaded a couple of articles in case you want to deepen in a more orderly way. So we can finish.